Hello and welcome. This is Eagle News. I'm David Oria in Washington. It's Saturday, July 8th, 2023, here in the nation's capital. The week's recap begins with the top United Nations officials appalled by increasing reports of gender-based violence in Sudan. They are calling for an immediate end to the suffering of women and girls caught in the middle of what is described as a senseless conflict. Rochelle Feria tells us more.
The United Nations says that even before fighting broke out in Sudan 11 weeks ago, over 3 million women and girls were already at risk of gender-based violence. This includes intimate partner violence. This number has now horribly climbed to an estimated 4.2 million people. Since the conflict began, the UN Human Rights Office in Sudan has received credible reports of 21 incidents of conflict-related sexual violence against at least 57 women and girls. The victims include at least 10 girls. In one case, as many as 20 women were reportedly raped in the same attack. The Unit for Combating Violence Against Women under Sudan's Ministry of Social Development has documented at least 42 alleged cases in the capital, Khartoum, and 46 in the Darfur region. Due to significant underreporting of gender-based violence, the real number of cases is undoubtedly far higher. The UN says the risk of sexual violence is especially high when women and girls are on the move seeking safer locations. Thus, an urgent need to ramp up assistance at reception sites for internally displaced people in Sudan's conflict-affected areas and neighboring countries. Top UN officials call for an immediate end to gender-based violence, including sexual violence as a tactic of war to terrorize people. They demand prompt, thorough, impartial, and independent investigations into all alleged violations and abuses of human rights and serious violations of international humanitarian law. UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Volker Turk says there must be a zero tolerance for sexual violence and that all perpetrators must be held accountable. Rochelle Feria, Washington, D.C., Eagle News. We live in extraordinary times.
A new report released by UNICEF and the World Health Organization reveals that globally, women are more likely to be responsible for fetching water for households. The report says that girls are nearly twice as likely as boys to secure water for the family and spend more time doing it each day. Arlene Ocampo has more.
Did you know that in 7 out of 10 households without supplies on premises, women and girls are responsible for fetching water? This, according to the first in-depth analysis of gender inequalities in drinking water, sanitation, and hygiene or wash-in households. A new report released by UNICEF and WHO notes that women and girls are more likely to feel unsafe using a toilet outside of the home. They also disproportionately feel the impact of lack of hygiene. According to the report, globally, 1.8 billion people live in households without water supplies on the premises. Women and girls aged 15 and older are primarily responsible for water collection in 7 out of 10 such households, compared with 3 in 10 households for their male peers. Girls under 15 are also more likely than boys under 15 to fetch water. In most cases, women and girls make longer journeys to collect it, losing time in education, work, and leisure, and putting themselves at risk of physical injury and dangers on the way. The report also shows that more than 500 million people still share sanitation facilities with other households, compromising women's and girls' privacy, dignity, and safety. WHO Environment, Climate Change, and Health Department Director Dr. Maria Neira warns that women and girls not only face wash-related infectious diseases like diarrhea and acute respiratory infections, they face additional health risks because they are vulnerable to harassment, violence, and injury when they have to go outside the home to haul water or just to use the toilet. Arlene Ocampo, Eagle News, we live in extraordinary times.
Let's head over to Canada, where its most populous city is in for a not-so-good air quality this summer. Yolanda Espiras tells us why.
Environment Canada has lifted the air quality warning it issued last week for Toronto, which put the city on top of the list of worst air quality in the world last Wednesday. Though the official warning has ended, Toronto is not completely out of the woods, as smoke and pollution from the wildfires in many parts of Canada are still ongoing. This leaves an uncertain summer season in Toronto, as threats of bad air quality may limit outdoor activities. According to reports from schools, haze due to smoke from the wildfires have forced them to move students' recess and outdoor activities indoors last month. Some outdoor sports practices have been canceled. Chair of Clean Air Hamilton and McMaster faculty member Bruce Newbold says that it's been an abnormal summer that will soon be the new normal, as climate change will cause more wildfires. Though reaction to air pollution is unique to each person, children, the elderly, those with diabetes, heart or lung disease are more at risk to the negative effects of worsening air pollution. Yolanda Aspiras, Toronto, Ontario, Eagle News. We live in extraordinary times.
Extraordinary stories from Thomas Likeness today. From giant kites flying to decarbonize maritime transport, to seaweeds potentially becoming supercrops, to a South Korean robot conducting an orchestra. These and more on Correspondent at Large.
And now news and commentary from around the globe. This past week we heard that the Earth's temperature spiked to its highest level in at least 44 years, maybe even longer. You can debate the causes, but you can't deny the fact that climate is changing. And with that in mind, we start with some items from the environmental file. Maritime shipping uses a lot of fuel to move cargo around the globe. Now, we're not going back to sailboats, but the latest green solution does rely on wind power. A couple of engineers who used to work at the aerospace company Airbus have borrowed an idea from kite surfers. They developed a technology they call Sea Wing. They left Airbus, started their own company, it's called AirSeas. They propose using huge kites. These things are big, 1,000 square meters in size. And they say they'll fly them 300 meters above the water to catch the wind, and these kites would help propel big cargo ships across the ocean. They estimate they could cut fuel consumption by up to 20%. Now, the kites are being tested on smaller ships in the Atlantic, and there are a few problems. They can't be used when sailing directly into the wind, and then there's reliability because if the wind isn't blowing, the kite won't be flying. In Japan, seaweed is being recognized globally as an eco-friendly supercrop. A longtime staple in the Japanese diet, kelp is now being used for other purposes. Researcher Henry Alexander says it makes a great organic farm fertilizer, putting more minerals into the soil. And Alexander says it can help with greenhouse gas emissions. He says, when you use it as animal feed, the cows, well, they're less gassy.
There's some exciting elements in terms of feeding it to cattle has shown really fantastic results in terms of reducing methane emissions.
Other uses include beauty and spa treatments. Kelp is put into tubs and bathhouses, and a cosmetic company uses it as an ingredient in its bath bombs. Alexander says other countries are looking at farming seaweed on a commercial scale. He says that could take pressure off of land and create jobs, while at the same time providing environmental benefits. These could range from carbon capture to deacidifying water. In Denmark, there's a squad of cops patrolling a different beat. Instead of walking the streets, they're making the rounds online. These officers sit at their desks, glued to computers, playing the popular game Counter-Strike. Now, as well as playing the game, the 10-member unit is on several other platforms, including Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. And they make no secret about their presence. They do make their presence known. On rare occasions, they might go undercover. The goal, though, is to make the internet a safer place for both children and adults. The primary targets? Sexual predators and online criminals. Since its creation last year, the unit has opened more than 65 cases, and they've received thousands of tips. In the trenches on the war front in Ukraine, an unusual friendship has developed between Ukrainian soldiers and a raven. Mavic has been hanging around since the soldiers found him in March. And at that time, the bird just jumped around because it had not yet learned to fly. Apparently, ravens are kicked out of the nest at an early age and end up growing up on their own. One soldier says the bird gets its name from the Mavic 3 drones that the Ukrainian army uses for surveillance because, like the drone, the bird can fly. Mavic, though, has turned out to be a bit of a troublemaker. He pilfers any of the soldiers' possessions that are just lying around, things like lighters, phones, coffee, tea, pretty much anything that isn't nailed down. But despite his mischief, the soldiers and Mavic have formed a bond. I've always loved live performances of orchestras. As a matter of fact, the first concert I ever attended was with the Edmonton Symphony Orchestra. But to me, putting a robot in front of musicians to conduct them, that just seems wrong. In Seoul, South Korea, a robot called Ever6 picked up the baton to lead a performance of the country's national orchestra. Engineers at the Korea Institute of Industrial Technology designed the two-armed android. After bowing to the audience, Ever6 got down to business and led the 60-piece orchestra through a 90-minute performance. At times, a human conductor assisted. Throughout the concert, the robot stared at the musicians without expression, only nodding its head in time to the music. Now, Ever6 has its limitations. It's not capable of listening or improvising in real time. Everything is pre-programmed. And that, my friends, is the difference between technology and art. I, for one, prefer the art. I'll be back in 7 days, and in the meantime, I wish you all peace, joy, and happiness in the ensuing week. Thomas I. Likeness, Correspondent at Large, Eagle News. We live in extraordinary times.
The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or CDC, is recommending respiratory syncytial virus, or RSV, vaccines from GSK and Pfizer. The recommendation is for people ages 60 years and older. Philip Toledo reports.
CDC Director Dr. Rochelle Walensky is endorsing the agency's recommendation for ages 60 and older to take new RSV vaccines using new shared clinical decision-making. The new vaccines, which are the first ones licensed in the U.S. to protect against RSV, are from GSK and Pfizer. Shared clinical decision-making means eligible individuals may receive a single dose of the vaccine based on the discussions with their healthcare provider about whether RSV vaccination is right for them. People at the highest risk for severe RSV illness include older adults, adults with chronic heart or lung disease, adults with weakened immune systems, and adults living in nursing homes or long-term care facilities. The CDC estimates that every year, RSV causes approximately 60 to 160,000 hospitalizations and 6,000 to 10,000 deaths among older adults. These new vaccines are expected to be available this fall. Philip Toledo in Atlanta, Georgia, Eagle News. We live in extraordinary times.
Marine animals are in danger as ElNiño phenomenon approaches the Galapagos Islands. Bruce Walmayo reports on Down to Earth.
The ElNiño phenomenon occurs on average every 2 to 7 years. Its episodes typically last 9 months to a year. In the Galapagos Islands, wildlife is in trouble as sea temperatures rise, leaving marine animals without food. In addition to this, heavy rains that can cause floods occur in nesting areas of land tortoises. Galapagos National Park Director Danny Rueda says the impact of the phenomenon is reflected in the reproductive success of the marine species. He says if the reproductive success of these species hits their population condition, the ElNiño phenomenon in the Galapagos National Park in the area of conservation will have a very serious effect. He fears that if the rains are abundant in frequency and intensity, the tortoises' nesting areas could be flooded and will reduce the reproduction of the nests, possibly to zero. The park has been expecting to have cold water as early as this time. But Rueda says what they have now is still very warm water. Stefano Castillo, a naturalist guide in the park, says algae is the beginning of the food chain for all other sea animals, especially for iguanas. The simple warming of the sea temperature causes algae to disappear, thus depriving sea animals of food. Bruce Balmeo, Eagle News, we live in extraordinary times.
Meanwhile, from super warm waters, let's swim over to a super littered lake in Kyrgyzstan. Divers who wish to experience clear waters when they dive are on a mission to rid this UNESCO heritage site of unwanted trash. Myla Simbulan has the details.
They are a dozen-strong scuba team looking to depollute the world's second biggest alpine lake. Their 59-year-old leader Anvar Samshuddinov says it would be lovely to dive and not find any waste. Like Isikal is a UNESCO heritage site. It is home to a diverse range of animal species. Unfortunately, the flow of visitors and the waste they often live is endangering the lake. Shamsuddinov says the beach may be deceivingly clear, but in reality, what is underwater is a hidden threat, and people just don't see it. A diver for Kyrgyzstan's emergencies ministry says since their mission began in March, they have already hauled 95 kilometers of fishing nets and 7.5 tons of rubbish. Business owners in Lake Isikal observe how most tourists behave. They say many beach guests sit, relax, and throw trash like sunflower seeds and cigarette butts that get buried under the sand. Despite being asked not to, they usually do it anyway. Local business owners end up having to clean up after them. Some tourists, however, say that the litter situation is unpleasant. They ask fellow vacationers not to litter, not to bring food, and not to leave anything by the shore. Myla Simbulan, Eagle News, we live in extraordinary times.
In a recent visit to Papua New Guinea, President Joko Widodo of Indonesia discussed with Prime Minister James Marape, among other things, border issues, maritime rights, and trade. Eko Ortaleza Quinola on Oceania at a Glance.
Indonesian President Joko Widodo was welcomed by Papua New Guinea Prime Minister James Marape at the Jackson International Airport. Widodo attends the first business forum between Indonesia and Papua New Guinea at the APEC House. The bilateral meeting tackles Papua New Guinea border agreements, trade and investment, implementation of visa exemption for diplomatic and official passport holders, West Papua issue, and fishing rights.
I want our business committee to rise up and pick on this connectivity we are making. The connectivity will move us not just in government to government and conversation like this, but actual infrastructure connectivity is programmed to open up.
A business forum and media conference attended by dignitaries and diplomatic corps followed next. It highlights the reinforcement to make more tangible trade, commerce, and investment opportunities. Both countries agreed to support the establishment of Indonesia and Papua New Guinea business agendas that will form an entity moving upward and running continuously.
I will continue to push for discussion on the Indonesia and PNG preferential trade agreement so that our economic cooperation can continue to grow.
Widodo commits 55 million kina for Port Moresby General Hospital's intensive care unit and for the mortuary. Indonesia's CityLink flights between Port Moresby and Denpasar have been launched too. Widodo and his delegates departed Papua New Guinea right after this one-day state visit.
Eko Ortaleza Quinola, Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea, Eagle News, we live in extraordinary times.
Aika will teach us today how to make this very interesting summer vegetable chili. So let's put our aprons on and go behind the counter.
Hey, I'm Aika, and welcome back to Behind the Counter, where we see easy and tasty meals be brought to life. Summer is here, and we've been waiting to share this healthy take on chili with this summer vegetable chili dish. Check back here for full recipes, and if there's a dish that you'd like to see, let us know in the comments below. Catch us on EagleNewsLive.com, on our Eagle News YouTube channel, and our Facebook page. Check back next time when we go Behind the Counter.
As always, before we let you go, here is our photo of the week. This is Buda Castle. It is also referred to as the Royal Palace. It sits on top of Castle Hill in Budapest, Hungary. The castle, which served as the residence of Hungarian kings, is now the home of cultural institutions such as the National Gallery and the Budapest History Museum. Thank you all for joining us again. If there are stories or topics you want us to share with you, just comment below. Follow us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter @Eagle News Live. I'm David Oria. We live in extraordinary times. Stay happy and healthy, everyone.